I'm Amanda. I was in a coma recently, but I could hear everything that was going on around me. It is difficult to believe, but only lying down, as if in a deep dream, you can understand who is loyal to you and who is not. Now I will tell you my story. Once, my family and I were going to spend the summer camping. This was our tradition. Every year on June 1st, we gathered, Dad, Mom, sister, and I, collected a lot of food, made a barbecue, ate all day, and played various games in nature. Well, in the evening, it was my favorite part. Dad would light a fire. We would string marshmallows on sticks and fry them over the fire, and then eat. It was cool. But this year, things didn't go quite as planned. In the morning, the day did not go well. The kettle burned, the car wheel was flat. As soon as we left the city limits, some madman flew into the oncoming lane and crashed into us. Dad tried to steer as fast as he could. It all happened in a second. The only thing I remember is I hugged my little sister tight in the back seat, and then it was dark. My mother told me that our car had overturned. Everyone else survived, and I got the most. I hit my head hard on the glass. When the parents recovered, they immediately called an ambulance. But since we were far from the city, during the time that the doctors were driving, I managed to lose a lot of blood, so I fell into a coma. My mom and dad were terrified in the hospital. My father said that he had never been so scared in his life. They were afraid of losing me. My parents and even my sister immediately donated blood for me. Then my mother started calling all my relatives and friends for blood transfusions. They hardly left the doctor's office, taking turns sleeping by my couch. You can say that they lived in the hospital with me, but my sister was sent to grandmother. The doctor told them that I needed an operation, but it was not certain that I would recover from it, but it was necessary. My parents gave their consent so that I could live. After everything was done, I was transferred from the intensive care unit to the ward. My condition was assessed as stable and severe, and I was still unconscious. A lot of relatives came to visit my body. Some of them were crying, some of them were silent. I was brought many favorite flowers. Tulips. They filled the entire ward. Of course, no one knew, but I felt it and I liked it. I clearly heard everyone who spoke to me. As soon as I called out, I didn't know what was going on. At first, I was terribly afraid. I didn't understand where I was and what was happening to me, why I couldn't feel my body. Inside, I started to panic. I wanted to scream. I called for my mother. For a second, I saw my long-dead grandfather. I ran up to him and began to ask where I was. I was not immediately confused by the fact that he was dead. My grandfather didn't want to talk to me. He just pointed his finger at me and then whispered, "It's not time yet." Then I realized what he meant, and it was as if I had woken up. Only it was like a dream in a dream, and I was only out of the first stage, but I was still asleep. Then my mother's hand was on my face. Strange voices were talking to her. I remember vividly that it was about me, about the operation, that I was miraculously alive, but they don't know how long I will be in a coma. What? Am I in a coma? No, it can't be. Mom, I'm here. I can hear you. Help me open my eyes, I shouted, but no one heard me. After I calmed down a bit, I tried to move my arm again, but it didn't work. After a few days, I realized that this was it. Doctors came to me, did something, discussed. Then, in addition to my parents and relatives, my friends and my boyfriend began to come. Oh no, Jacob, I thought. We were going to the movies and we never went. It was the first time I heard him cry. It was painful, as if you were deliberately hurting your loved ones. If only they all knew that I didn't want it all. It's all like torture. I cried very hard, almost every day, just to myself. Every time my parents came by, I wanted to tell them how much I loved them. A week passed, a month, and Christmas was approaching. And I still fell asleep and woke up in my sleep, greeting all the visitors. I have already learned the names of my doctors and heard the stories of all my friends. At first, Jacob came every day with flowers, and he told us the latest news about our mutual friends. But after 6 months, his visits became less frequent, and he sat almost all the time in silence by my side. I felt like he was coming in the name of duty. The vinyls had become a system, not a desire. His silence and sighs spoke louder than words, and I didn't want to believe it. I must have looked like a living corpse. Toward Christmas, he booked movie tickets and told me that he would be waiting for me at the premiere of a new movie in a week. He remembered how I wanted to go to the movies. It was so nice of him. For a moment, there was hope for the best. I wanted to kiss him, hug him, but I couldn't. However, after the session, Jacob came to me a little distracted. I didn't need to see him with my eyes, I just needed to hear his voice. He was talking about one thing, but his mind was elsewhere. Incoherent sentences, a trembling voice. Something obviously happened just now. Jake told the story of that movie as it happened. Then he said, jokingly, that he waited for me until the last, and then thought that I did not like him and I decided to stay at home. A couple of minutes before the start, he was about to leave, and then my friend Emma met him. Imagine, we ran into each other right on the way out. I was going to leave, but on the contrary, she came to watch a movie. It turns out that one too. Well, in general, we decided to go to the gym together, he said. Then he told some nonsense about her supposedly funny, ridiculous stories and laughed at them. Damn it! What the hell? I know these stories. I'm her best friend. In general, after another 6 months, they began to meet. Yes, just like that, you can smash me to pieces. How do you like this double betrayal? I was ready to get out of bed when I heard that they were now together. You had the guts to say it directly, sitting next to me. I hate it. It's been a little over a year, and these two have buried me alive. They had the courage to come to me as a couple. My heart burned with anger. I hated both of them. And then I suffered. Bitterly, silently. From that moment on, I didn't care about the other customers. Gradually, everything returned to its former life. My parents began to work. Resources for my treatment were running out. I needed more money, and they, besides me, have another child. For Saw stopped coming at all. Well, my friends too, less and less. That's how I got lonely. After 5 years, only my parents came to see me. One day, my mother ran into my room in tears and screamed that she would not give me up. It turns out that the doctors offered to disable the devices that provide life support for me, since enough time had passed. After all, 5 years is not a small time. My brain is slowly dying, like all other parts of the body. Every year, there is less chance of independent recovery. I knew about it from the doctor's conversations, and I already knew how hard it was. I'm sick of it myself. I wanted peace. My parents had a big fight over this question. My mother chased everyone out of the room and wept bitterly over me. She no longer asked, but demanded that I returned consciousness. And I swore that no matter what, I would always be there for you. This kind of scolding between them and Dad lasted for about a week. Then he said that he was tired of living like this, that they had a living child and she needed them, and it was taking too much energy and money for nothing. In that moment, I hated myself. I wasn't mad at my father because he was completely right. I felt so bad that I started to cry. At this moment, my mother screamed, "She's crying! She's crying!" God, what am I paying for? It turns out I had tears rolling out of my eyes. Around me immediately gathered doctors. They were discussing something in their medical. 3 months later, I came to my senses. It was so easy. I opened my eyes, and that was it. By the way, yes, my mother never let them turn off the machines. She's the only one who believed in me for 6 years and didn't betray me. Sometimes it's enough for at least one person to believe in you as much as they can. I think only my mother's faith helped me. After that, I relearned to eat, walk, breathe, and my muscles atrophied a lot. But that's another story.
How does it feel to wake up during surgery? When you can't move or speak, but you feel everything that's happening to you at this moment. Sometimes I read several similar horror stories before, but I couldn't imagine that I myself would one day encounter this. This is the moment when you feel your organs like someone is swarming in them. Unpleasant sensations. I've always looked after my health. A healthy diet, lots of fruit, and daily workouts. By the way, I play football for the national team of our school. To be correct, I was playing. It didn't seem to mean anything, but once we played in the yard together with a parallel class, the contestants had a guy named Bill on their team. Large build and very clumsy. And what do you think? To my misfortune, he fell with all his weight on me, so much so that I broke all the bones in my foot. Of course, he didn't do it on purpose. At first, I didn't even notice anything from the shock, but when I realized what had happened, the pain suddenly made itself felt. I even lost consciousness for a moment. I only woke up when I was being taken in an ambulance, sitting next to the doctor. When he saw me, he said that he had done anesthesia and would perform the operation, namely, you need to put a plate on the bone. Then I was not able to think about anything, but it was terribly scary. The doctor assured me that this is a standard operation and there's nothing to be afraid of, but I still worried. For me, it was the first operation in my life, and even if everyone around you says there's nothing wrong with it, it's still kind of creepy to imagine how you'll be cut and then dig inside. It's like a horror movie. But the doctors I got a good one. They joked and tried to cheer me up. Already in the operating room, an anesthesiologist approached me and also threw a couple of jokes to diffuse the situation. He put a tube in my nose, and I suddenly felt heavy. Everything swam, and I passed out exactly as it should be. In general, everything went on as usual, but then something happened in this quiet course of the operation that no one could have expected. As far as I remember, I started to wake up slowly. The brain couldn't figure out what was going on. My mind was trying to wake up. My body felt heavy. I tried to open my eyes, but it was difficult. As soon as I opened my eyelids, a bright light was shining directly on my face. After getting used to it a little, I finally opened my eyes completely and for about another minute tried to understand what was happening. I found that a tube had been inserted into my right nostril, and it was probably used for air to breathe better, but my nostril was blocked. I didn't understand what was happening because I vaguely remembered that I was in surgery, and the last thing I remembered was that after I was anesthetized, I asked my assistants to tell me a story before going to bed. I was lying on the operating table, and I continued to do the operation in real time. I felt holes being drilled into my bones one by one. There was no pain. I only felt the moments when the drill passed through the bone wall. It can be compared to how metal plates were drilled in labor lessons. First, the effort, and then abruptly releases. Here and I felt the sound of a drill. Don't know how it's called honey tool. And these pushes, time after time. I began to panic wildly. But as they say, trouble does not come alone. The anesthesia must have numbed my entire body, and I couldn't even move my lips. I couldn't scream or move my hands. All that remained was just to watch the process. My head was all mixed up. The doctors didn't even notice that I was awake and continued to operate calmly. I've seen them pass tools to each other. Imagine personally watching how you do the operation and at the same time not being able to somehow draw attention to yourself. It's just something unreal. When the panic passed, I decided that it was probably quite interesting. Not everyone will get this opportunity, you know? And there was no pain. So I even got used to it. But suddenly, one of the assistants glanced at my face and then froze in disbelief. It was obvious she didn't expect this, flustered from the surprise. The girl quickly refilled the tube and added more anesthesia. I fell asleep before the end of the operation, and I woke up when the incision was sewn up. But even then, I should not have woken up. Apparently, my body at that time categorically refused to sleep, but the assistants were already ready for this, and already quickly put me to sleep. I woke up in the ward and was recovering a little. At that moment, a doctor came to me and asked how I was feeling. Everything was normal, and I noticed that all the paramedics were crowded behind the door. Apparently, they were very curious to see such a restless patient. I felt like a star. My doctor smiled, but it was obvious that he was very worried about his mistake in front of me. But I'm not offended. On the contrary, I love adrenaline. Have any of you experienced this situation? Tell us under the video, and don't forget to subscribe and share my story with your friends. Can and with them occurred such interesting history.